And so I made these drawings, and so she was really impressed with them, and she said, fine, okay, so you'll be my illustrator. I don't know if you want to put this on the tape, but so I did these drawings, and so we worked out, you know, that I would keep track of my time and everything, and I pored over these drawings. I worked so hard on them. And so then I gave her the drawings, she liked them a lot, and then I gave her my little accounting sheet. Oh, so much? This costs so much? It was like $10 a drawing or something like that. It was so, I mean, that was a whole other side of that generosity. I mean, there was tremendous generosity. There's intellectual generosity, a lot, and there was a lot of generosity in terms of when you visited her at her house. It was always food and wine and talk, and you got this sense of all of this abundant life and interest and intellectual curiosity, and the talk was always really rich and lively and wonderful. And Jim and I spent many Thanksgivings and Christmases with her and her family, and Christmas Eve was a very big event because we have 12-course dinners, Christmas Eve dinners, Lithuanian, you know, Christmas fish course and meat course, and it was incredible to go and have those celebrations. I drew from photographs
that she had taken
or that she had gotten from museums, because these artifacts were a lot in Eastern Europe. They were all in museums, primarily the actual artifacts. So you couldn't really have hands-on experience with the actual things. So she was working with photographs. However, she had seen these things, so she knew the details of these images that sometimes wouldn't show up in the photographs, and then she would say, okay, this image has lines here. You can't quite see it in the photograph, but there are lines. You know, right here there's a byline here. And it was what made her, I think, a really spectacular teacher, and because she evoked out of people really their best work, and she was so encouraging. As a teacher, she really, really wanted you to just do as much and work as hard and be as brave as you possibly could in your inquiry. And so it was very stimulating, and it was a wonderful experience. And she gave me an A+. She said it was the only A+ she ever gave a student. And, you know, I was in the art department, I was getting an MFA, I was not an archaeology student, but I was passionate about learning what she had to teach, and I was passionate about this material, and it was compelling to me. In Sardinia, yeah, when we were in Sardinia, we went to the museum there, and that was the same kind of thing. She wanted to see what they had in their back rooms, and of course, usually the stuff they had in the back rooms was what was most interesting to her, because she knew how to look at it, and she knew what she was looking at. So she would go in those back drawers, and, you know, she'd identify things and then photograph or make arrangements with the museum people. When I was drawing those images, I felt very drawn into them. And after doing so many of them, I did, I don't know, hundreds of them, and they were laborious to do. And I spent a lot of time doing them because I wanted them to be really good. I wanted to really infuse those images, you know, with the life that I felt was in there. And so it was a deep engagement with those images. There's no way that she could not come from a scientific viewpoint, because her training was so rigorous. I don't think we can even begin to understand what it's like to speak 20 languages. Who knows that these days? In our academia, you know, in our training, which is very, very narrow now, nobody understands the width and the breadth of information that she brought with her when she began to do this work. So why? So she had that background, that early background of going through the Lithuanian countryside and collecting myth. So she had this background of mythology. Then she had all these languages. And then she had her archaeology training, which was rigorous and European and wide-ranging. So then she landed in the Peabody. So she had and then she did her excavations. So she had so much breadth of knowledge when she eventually came to this. Was not early in her life, but really towards, in the later part of her life is when this material began to emerge. So this was not something that just flew in the window or, an idea that she grabbed hold of. Is not superficial at all. It was very, very deep in her own intelligence and in her own knowing. And she brought both her intuition, which was high, and her scientific knowledge. Like she brought her artist and she brought her scientist.
System.
Right, because you don't extract wavy lines out of it. You have to put the wavy lines in context. So if the wavy lines are associated with a certain figure over and over and over again, you understand that wavy lines means this in context. You can't take chevrons out of context. Chevrons and wings together, chevrons and any bird motifs, they go together, and they go together again and again and again in lots of different figures, but it's the context. And this is not to say that maybe she didn't make some mistakes or make some, extrapolations that weren't exactly correct, but the general thrust of her work, the general direction that it took, was to say there is a whole coherent symbol system here. It's coherent. Maybe I don't have all the dots connected, but there is a deep coherency here, and it has and there's a knowledge base in this symbol system. And she was lifting that up and seeing it and then putting it out. And of course, it probably wasn't all, totally correct. And there's much more to learn, and she would be the first one to say that. Keep working on it. I don't know the definitive translation here. Keep working. The deep past matters to us very much because it informs our present and it informs our future. And it's not just about looking at old dusty things in the past that have no relevance to us, because this says a lot about our bigger story as human beings, our development of consciousness, where we've been informs who we are today. For myself, there's a tremendous exhilaration in a sense to have one hand on that deep ancient past and to pull it through into the present and into the future. It's electrifying when you do that. It's very electrifying and exciting. It's it's different than even 100 years ago, how we could think about that. Even Carl Jung could only take female imagery down to Crete, the Minoans. That's as far as he could go, because that's as far as the information went that we had 100 years ago. And so now we have this whole other body of knowledge that enlarges our idea of who we are as Western European people. I think there's been a lot of criticism about Marija's work as if there was a golden age of matriarchy, or golden age when women ruled and it was peaceful and it wasn't warlike, and so I think those kinds of longings for more paradisical reality where women had power and that kind of thing, it's a romanticization of what we're looking at. And obviously a lot of people have a longing for that, for knowing that maybe at one point there was a time when there wasn't war. We'd all like to have that idea that we could live in a more peaceful way. But I think it's not a good thing to extrapolate ideology, because we're very time-bound. And what I noticed, even when she was alive, who was attracted to it? Women who are feminists were very attracted to that work. This was a big surprise to her. It wasn't one that she gladly welcomed in the beginning. Mm-hmm. She did not welcome this. Who she wanted recognition from was her peers, other archaeologists, people who were doing significant work in the field of archaeology. That's who she wanted praise and admiration from. The fact that all these women all of a sudden were showing up and so excited and so infused with the idea of goddess-worshipping cultures, this was like really incredible. And so she was a little put off by that in the beginning. I will say that after a while, these were the women who sustained her in her life. These are the women who circled around her through her illness. These are the women who really carried her spirit in the last years. I think she suffered a tremendous backlash from the intellectual community who, first of all, archaeology is getting more and more oriented towards material, not towards meaning. And so she was interested in meaning. She wanted to know, what is the meaning of this? And not only what is the meaning of it, but what's the spiritual meaning? And that's where her inquiry took her. And so she had tremendous backlash from the material archaeologists. There's a wide repertoire that she drew on. So the backlash against her, I think, is part of the backlash against feminism, because she got identified with feminism, because she's saying this goddess-worshipping culture. And the whole thing, I think, got reduced in the public mind to a very sort of simple myth of matriarchy, which is, to reduce her work to that is a travesty, basically, because it denies the depth and the breadth of her investigation. She was a scholar, and she worked very hard. She did her archaeological digs, she did her work. So to get dismissed or to get trivialized or to get marginalized in these kinds of ways was deeply painful for her. It was very painful for her. And so then it was also very hard for her to accept the love and the care and the excitement that came from these other communities, the communities of women that gathered around her, the communities of artists. It was easier for her to accept admiration from artists because she felt an affinity there to begin with. But to get this great uprising of women from the women's community was astonishing to her. It was totally astonishing. And I think as she got older and sicker, and as she sort of, I think, eventually realized that her work in her lifetime was not going to reach the significance that she knew it to have, I think she relaxed a little bit. She let people into her life. She let people care for her. She rode on the wave of that love that came to her. One of the things that is really, really striking to people is that people have a spiritual narrative to go to that stems from Western European, Eastern European culture. So then people don't have to appropriate from other cultures. They don't have to appropriate from Native American cultures. They don't have to appropriate from African cultures. That what women say is that this gives me a base for my own spiritual practices. And I think also, when I work with women around this material, it's something that's recognizable to them, even if they've never heard of it before. There's a certain recognition that comes when people begin to look at these images. There's a certain deep recognition that comes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And is inspiring. And the fact that there are so many women that are hungry for this kind of imagery, and that they just took this material and took it in all kinds of different directions, some which she would agree with, some she wouldn't.
Exactly.
But that there's some seed of information in there that is inspiring and motivating for women. She was very single-minded in her life, and her single-mindedness was around her work. And that she had 3 daughters was a very big challenge for her to raise these girls, and to be the mother was a very big challenge for her, because she was primarily a scholar, and her ambition, she had tremendous ambition, and she had to have tremendous ambition, and she had tremendous will. I think she probably felt that she didn't do the best job as a mother. And I would say that actually, Jim and I, when we spent a lot of time with them, Javier and Arasa in particular, and Maria, and when we're there, then we're just there enjoying ourselves and having a good time, and it's a family atmosphere, and there's cooking going on, and there's food going on, but I have a feeling that those daughters did not always appreciate the influx of all these strange women in their mother's life. I think that it was strange for them to have this steady stream of devoted women coming to, pray at Maria's altar or something like that. That she was such a magnified person in many women's eyes. And if you're a daughter of a woman like that, and her humanness, I think it's very hard to have a whole stream of women coming to honor your mother as something that you maybe don't necessarily even know her to be. The primary pivotal point in her life was the death of her father. And she speaks about that. Probably she's spoken about it many times to many people, but the death of her father totally changed her direction. And at that point, then she realized that she wanted to be a scholar, she wanted to take her life seriously, she wanted to carry forth the work. And I think that was the point of entry for her life's work. And I'm sure many people have talked to you about that, her story about coming to the Peabody, with her one coat and her one dress. How she said she came with nothing and asked for a job there, and she knew that there was this university there and Harvard, and she wanted a job, and they gave her a job at the Peabody. So I think that was a very big turning point. And the only reason that they really took her on, she said, was because she had all these languages, and they were Eastern European languages, and this was in the 50s, And people were, needed to have that knowledge, and not very many people had that.
Exactly.
So I think the other pivotal place in her life was leaving her marriage and coming to UCLA. And I think it was at UCLA that she really gathered herself. Well, she was at Stanford for a little bit, but I think at UCLA she really gathered herself as a serious archaeologist and as a professor. And how she described leaving it was she left in the middle of the night. She knew she had this job. She had done all of the, the groundwork in order to leave, and she just packed her stuff up and took her kids and left. She did, but she had that kind of courage, and she had this kind of will. I mean, even to travel with her, to go on airplanes and boats, even when she was sick, she was strong like a bull. She had such an amazing physical energy. It was her physicality. She was just so energetic in that kind of way. And when I traveled with her, I was usually like trailing behind her. I couldn't keep up with her. What's the matter? Are you weak? And I'm sitting in the Rome airport after that conference in Malta, and I'm just like totally wiped out. And she's reading the map for Sardinia. She's on to the next, on to the next. She looks over at me. What's the matter? Are you weak? She says. I think in a lifetime, if you're lucky, you meet one or two people who really change the direction of your life. And she was one of those people for me. She totally, her presence in my life, it wasn't anything she did particularly, although she did introduce me to Jim, which was quite a major shift in my life. But her presence in my life gave me a compass and let me find my direction. And I think the work that came out of my life from that point on is the work that I do now. So she was one of those people who influences a life in a very big way.